What's up, YouTube? This is Plant-Based Booch, the geek that likes eating plants just as much as they like smoking them. And today I am here with my Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 review. This is James Gunn's magnum opus. He's closing out his tenure with the MCU, with the Guardians themselves, the team that he brought to life and made such an integral part of the MCU. He's going to the DCEU now, and we'll see how that goes. But I'm here to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and this, weirdly enough, is actually my first Guardians review. So what I'm going to do is do my Guardians 3 review, then I'm going to force my wife to sit through rewatching Guardians 1 and 2 at some point. She stays around in the living room today, and I'm going to be like, oh my god, it's for the YouTube channel. And then I'm going to do reviews for the other two movies as well, because I've said it before and I'll say it again. James Gunn loves tackling trauma. He loves tackling difficult things in his movies. Now, I don't know if it's safe to say he loves tackling these things, but he certainly does it a lot. Maybe it's something he has to do, just like the way I have to mention my trauma in every single video that I make. You know, he did mention in several interviews for Peacemaker that a big theme was loving problematic people. And, you know, if you go to my Crying Over the DCEU video, I do mention Peacemaker and how much I resonate with that character. I'll also be covering it in Guardians 1 and Guardians 2, those reviews, because problematic father figures are just themes of those films as well. Yondu and Ego, but that's all in the past. Let's talk about the now. This movie was, oh, by the way, spoiler warning. Spoilers abound right now, okay? This movie was a real emotional roller coaster for me. I expected the worst from the beginning. We all went into this knowing that somebody was going to die. And I'm not really sure that anybody did. That's discrediting those side characters, the characters who are in Rocket's origin, right? You know, at the very end, when they're rescuing those animals, they say that, oh, I thought we were limiting it to the higher life forms, you know, but the whole point is that we are all higher life forms. The high evolutionary, when he evolves these animals, for some reason, eventually they become, you know, sentient to a humanoid level, you know, which is just aesthetically pleasing, if not for comic book purposes, then definitely to furries, which is absolutely fine. I'm not yucking anybody's yum. Way to be represented in a film. I think that Guardians represents a lot of different groups. As somebody who is plant-based, I will say that, yeah, I do believe that all animals do feel pain, and that, you know, it's kind of messed up to experiment on certain beings, you know, other beings, just to do terrible things to things that, you know, like that can't defend themselves and stuff. You know, I think it's just it's obviously you shouldn't commit atrocities toward anybody, but, you know, especially toward the most fragile, those who aren't able to stick up for themselves or defend themselves. I don't think anything the High Evolutionary does is right. I don't think that his morality is right in any way, shape, or form. You know, they kind of went to, he was like, oh, the bigotry and blah, blah, blah that I saw while I was on Earth, like kind of like a mirror, like a really foggy mirror of Killmonger or whatever. And like, it's kind of like, all right, listen, we've heard it all before, blah, blah, blah. And while, yeah, those are all real issues, and while, like, personally, I can empathize with the idea of, like, you know, Earth is awesome except for the people. Like, if there were just fewer people and more animals, things might be better. So, like, I get it. But also, the man is a psychopath. He doesn't care about the animals. He cares about creating the perfect society. We thought Peter's father was Ego. This guy is Ego to the max. He creates such an amazing being in Rocket, and instead of being proud of Rocket and helping Rocket to, you know, continue growing and becoming great and helping him create this disgusting fucking society, he decides that Rocket, you know, has to be done away with. Rocket is better than him. Rocket is smarter than him. Rocket doesn't even speak correctly, and yet is still capable of such amazing genius. This really gets to the High Evolutionary. I think that the High Evolutionary, along with a lot of other villains in James Gunn's works, you know, he represents that narcissistic parent. He believes himself to be God. He believes himself to be the creator, and he's worthy of respect. He's worthy of admiration just based on his creation of these beings, although he could do away with them on a whim, which we see him do several times in this film. I don't know where this amazing linguistic skill is coming from right now, because rest assured, I am pretty stoned out of my mind right now. One thing that I think the movie did it well, but I don't always appreciate this. It's kind of Walking Dead season 7 premiere to me, where we all knew that Glenn was going to die, but they still like kind of made us, you know, sit through, oh, is it going to be this person? Is it going to be this person? Is it going to be that person? Who was it? Who got killed? You know, blah, blah, blah. They do that a lot in this movie. And the weirdly cool thing about it, and it's a big reason why I stay away from trailers these days, despite being a movie review channel, is because trailers are part of the plot now. Like, it is intentional that people cut trailers that are going to mislead us and make us think certain things are happening and make us theorize certain things or certain appearances or cameos or whatever it is, and put us off the scent, so that way, you know, they can still surprise us in the film. You know, I think this film did it, especially with the first one, with the first trailer. That was the only one I actually watched. The rest of them I did not. But yeah, they told us basically, somebody's going to die. It's going to be tragic. You know, we're all going to go to the sky, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Rocket and all this other stuff. And so the whole film is based around Rocket's going to die. And then during that, is it going to be Drax? Is it going to be Nebula? Is it going to be Quill? You know, which of these characters is actually going to die? Is it going to be Groot? You know, kind of like there's stakes. Anything can happen. But none of them do die at the end. And it's not like I'm disappointed by that necessarily. I would have been okay with one of them going, but I do like this idea that sometimes things aren't that clean. Sometimes you don't get to just pass in a blaze of glory as the hero. Sometimes you have to go back and you have to confront the difficult things. And that's Quill's arc. That's a lot of their arcs, you know? Quill has to go back and meet his grandfather and confront his mother's death that he's been running away from since he was 8 years old. And his sister, Mantis, she has to figure out who she is, because her entire life she served ego. She served that narcissistic parent, and now has to discover, like so many of us, her identity post that, now that she has this independence, this liberation, this freedom. Quill, what I will say is, I would have been okay with his death in that like vacuum of space situation, despite how gruesome they made his face look. I honestly thought that he and James Gunn had a falling out based on how I was like, wow, this is how they're going to take him out. That's messed up. But they didn't, and that's okay. You know, once again, it's more difficult sometimes to do the self work. And sometimes that, you know, not everyone gets the, you know, the clean ending, regardless of whether or not you consider it to be a happy or sad ending. Sometimes, you know, like I said, you don't know. People just have to do the work, and we'll see where those journeys go. You have to confront the difficult feelings, and that's a big part of what this film is also about. The one reason I would have been okay with Quill dying when he went back to grab the MP3 player, I would have been okay with that because this whole film, he can't let things go. You know, he never could. He could never let things go, and he can never confront those difficult feelings. And this whole time, he's hung up on Gamora, his girlfriend who died. She is gone. Gamora is gone. There is a Gamora back in this world, and I think they do a great job with her. You know, she's very fun. She's unpredictable. She's not the typical hero that we expect. She doesn't just go along with everything. She still has like that edge from Thanos, but also she has found this family in the Ravagers, and she's a leader, and she's very fun. But also, she makes it very apparent that it's not her responsibility to fix Peter Quill. It's not her responsibility to heal his broken heart. You know, he has to do that all on his own, and she can't be this idea of what he needs her to be. She is a whole person unto herself, and, you know, that exists independently of his grief. He's not able to let things go, so him going back for the MP3 player, him going back for his music, his comfort, which is something I can very much relate to. I relate to a lot with Quill, as we'll find out when I review the rest of these films. I figured that, like, if he never went back for the music, if he could have just let it go, that he would have lived. But at the end, we find out that Rocket ends up keeping the music. So Peter does let it go. So I'm fine with him not dying. I'm fine with him going back to meet his family and find his roots. I love this idea. It was very subtle, you know, because Once again, James Gunn, this movie was actually dedicated to his father, James Gunn Sr., I think it said in the credits. I'll double check while I'm editing this, excuse me if I got it wrong. Peter says, my grandpa was a hard man, and, my mom was dying, and he just yelled at me and pushed me out of the room. And then he sees that, I guess marrying a black woman is a symbol of like, this man changing. And we never explicitly said this man was racist or bigoted, but I think, there's a lot of coded characters here, and maybe just based on a Midwest older white man, it goes without saying, but we see that this is a man who, instead of being further hardened by the death of his daughter and his grandson going missing, he learns to love. And he softens up and learns to accept good things into his life, and he's able to accept Quill when he comes back, and I think that that's very beautiful. The love that that Quill's mom passed on to him, he in through her music, he ends up passing it on to Rocket, and I think that that's a really great like full circle moment. I want to move on to the animal stuff real quick. That was very difficult for me. Both my wife and I have rescued a couple of dogs. I have worked in animal rescue for a bit, and it's really a passion of mine. And to open the movie with these animals who are obviously they're in a terrible situation, but the allegory that I saw was a hoarding situation. A lot of animals are kept in hoarding situations. They're not in control of it. Some of their first memories, my dog included, are just sitting around in your own feces, and the entire time the cages are full of feces, and that subtle detail was just so difficult for me to see these animals who also, they have actual voices, so they kind of represent, you can relate to them regardless of whether or not you're an animal, or how do we know, maybe they're not even like animals, maybe they're human brains that were put in animals. That was one thought that I had. But I guess because he's called the High Evolutionary, we're led to believe that he found ways to advance their brains further. So Rocket, he does come to terms with the fact that he is a raccoon. But anyway, that you see these broken creatures, for lack of a better term, who are making the best of a terrible situation, just as so many of us did growing up, that like sometimes the best you can do is just find people who match your brand of weirdo and thrive, baby. And that is what this movie really is, all the way through to the end. It is an ode to the weirdos. It is an ode to the losers. It has been since the beginning. Quill literally calls them losers in the first movie. It's about people who have lost, people who have experienced incredible pain, incredible trauma, and people who continue to move on in spite of it. And instead of being hardened, they choose to be guardians of the galaxy. They choose to, they buy nowhere, and it's a place that refugees go. We see Xandarians, we see people from all different races and species, and now all over the animal kingdom. They all take refuge on nowhere with the Guardians, and I love that. Without the X-Men in the MCU yet, I think that the Guardians have done a fantastic job as that substitute in representing the coded characters, the neurodiverse, the queer ones. There was a lot of heartbreaking imagery here. What happened to Rocket and his friends. Seeing that, unfortunately, he kind of helped. But I did think it was very poetic that his friends didn't get to die in locked cages. That scene at the end where he finds all the baby raccoons and they're his brethren, and he starts putting all of them onto his body, and then he sees all of the cages and there's not enough time to save them all. And that's what it's like working in rescue. And also not just working in rescue, but working in any sort of service industry, working in, in childcare, working in education, working in therapy and mental health, working in, medicine in general. I imagine you want to save everyone, and you can't. And it is heartbreaking. And that was, oh my God. I don't think I had a dry eye the last 10 minutes of this film. So now on to the coded characters. I think that, you know, Drax from the beginning has been coded as a neurodiverse or an autistic character. If you prefer a person with autism or a person on the spectrum, you know, he doesn't do great with metaphors. He says exactly what he's thinking in the moment, you know, regardless of whether or not it hurts anyone's feelings. He can't read social cues, but he's still a very empathetic individual. And despite people believing him to be stupid, you know, which he's called many times, a lot of ableist language in the film, but like, I'll get hung up on things, but it doesn't stop me from, you know, from loving a film. You know, I think that this film overall has very good intentions. Despite that, like the whole Nathan Fillion cameo where he's like, oh, I got one of those too, you know, and that whole thing, like, it was cringe. Sometimes folks don't know any better. And, you know, like I said, I think despite that, this movie is an ode to the Weirdos, and that, you know, in Drax's character, it shows that this movie serves more of as, I think, as an ally to anyone who is different. I consider myself a weirdo. So Drax is someone who, despite him seeming to like to not care about anyone else's feelings, his feelings get hurt very easily. He is a very emotional individual that is typical of neurodiverse people on the spectrum, people with ADHD as well. You know, that like sometimes you say what you're thinking, you just blur things out and you hurt people's feelings and you don't get it. And then other times people say things that really hurt your feelings and it ruminates with you. And like you know, when Batista, you know, when Drax had that moment toward the end where he was like, oh, like you think I'm stupid. Like he was like really upset. He was really hurt, even though Mantis was trying to defend him. And we see that he is intelligent. He knew a language that none of the other people knew. He, you know, nobody expected him to know that language. And he was able to, you know, to have the emotional intelligence to connect with these children. And that was something none of the other ones could do because, well, they never knew what it was like to be raised by an empathetic adult. And Drax, for all of his supposed shortcomings, he was a loving father. And we see that he's also a loving teammate. I do want to mention that he has sensory issues. We know in Guardians 2 that he doesn't like the jetpacks because they brush up against his nipples, which is made as a gag, but boom. Also, autistic coded character. And he also doesn't like how certain colors clash with him. You know, he's kind of obsessive about wearing certain things. So just wanted to put that out there. Another thing real quick, I do think that like this movie could be kind of taken from like, if not a libertarian, definitely like a right-wing point of view. I just think that we're in a social political climate right now. I'll include a link in the description. Despite certain commentators saying that like, oh, like we're bending over backwards for the queer community and, you know, and giving whatever we want to whatever trans people want, and, you know, we're being bullied into submission and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not the case. You may feel that way, you know, because, oh, trans women were given a day and Dylan Mulvaney was put on a Bud Light can, but by all means, rest assured knowing that the country as a whole is trying to suppress and kill trans people en masse. There's a variety of you know, anti-trans sentiment and legislation that is going through day by day, state by state. And I do think there is a way to look into this. You didn't like things as they were. You were trying to change things and make them perfect and blah, blah, blah. Like the High Evolutionary is this villain for trying to change things. And I don't think that's the case. I think the High Evolutionary is a villain for committing, inhumane acts of violence and terror upon living beings. That's what I think. But I do think that if you want to change yourself and that's your identity, then you absolutely reserve the right to do that, and that, you know, that is your right as a person. And we see that in all of these films. There's a lot of different characters. They're not all human. They're not all quite the same sort of able-bodied. You know, Nebula has been, you know, rearranged many times. We also see that there's a lot of the disabled community in here as well. We see a lot of mistreatment of them, both in real life and in the films. And, you know, once again, Gunn does a good job sticking up for the weirdos. I think that Nebula was an absolute MVP in this film. She was fantastic, and just a true leader, run into action every time things needed doing. Everyone has like a different relationship with Nebula. Nebula is just a very motivated individual. And real quick, Nebula was also in the scene that had the first, I think, use of the F word in any MCU film. That's right. In a PG-13 film, you get allotted one F word, and the Guardians of the Galaxy have been pushing it every time. We weren't exactly sure, and this time they did it with the most relatable F word drop when it was Quill trying to get Nebula to open the door and get into the car so they could drive to the big pyramid. Oh man. But yeah, Nebula was really fantastic. Speaking of Nebula, a lot of the tech that was in this film I thought was very fun. They had Chekhov's gravity boots. I'm telling you, I leaned to my friend next to me in the theater and I was like, Chekhov's gravity boots, when Rocket was using them at the beginning. And I also knew it was going to be Chekhov's arrow. There were a lot of Chekhov's items. But then when I was watching the new Rockstars review, Eric Voss called them Chekhov's gravity boots, which that was validating to me. They very much were. Always introduce something at the beginning because it's going to come through at the end, and there's definitely a lot of that. And something I just thought about, maybe you could see a pro-queer message in this film as well, like other than, once again, just a variety of different people who were abused finding refuge and solace together and living as genuinely as they possibly can at the end. But you could also see, the whole thing is based on Rocket trying to get life-saving healthcare. And because Rocket isn't seen as an actual person, he's seen as not as a human, he's seen as property, but he's not seen as a person. And because of that lack of humanity, because of that, and if you want to say human, you could say sentience, whatever, I believe, I call my dogs persons all the time. They are sentient creatures, and yeah, I'll stand by it, whatever. But yeah, I think that, you could also relate a lot of that to the real life. This isn't my Politipop podcast. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, Rocket is being denied life-saving healthcare because he is not acknowledged as a legitimate person. I also like how Nebula and Gamora's arcs through these films have become about finding the family that loves and respects you and nurtures you instead of the family that raised you, the family that believes that they own you. Lila says in this film, she says, there's the hands that make us and the hands that guide the hands. Maybe you were born into a terrible situation, but your reason for existence isn't that terrible situation. It's to do something better, to do something greater. And, Rocket really does represent that. I think Rocket also can be coded neurodiverse because, he has these moments where he doesn't speak right, he doesn't talk good or whatever, however you want to put it, but he is very much a genius. And, I love how this finally explained how he is able to construct all of these gadgets basically from nothing. His mind is ever growing, it is ever evolving, and he is just very smart. And, unfortunately, he is not appreciated for it. He's persecuted for it. He's seen maybe as a threat. I said before that I thought Gamora was a different character in this, seeing her with the Ravagers. I really liked what they did with her. While it seemed like she was hardened, we find out that when she gets back with her Ravagers, that she actually is a different person. She has been able to find love and has been able to find acceptance. One real quick thing about those Ravagers, it was awesome to me how they managed to grab some sling rings from that battle in Endgame. I don't know if they got a sorcerer on their team or they just, stole some sling rings from some dead sorcerers, but that was awesome. It was very cool. I just love the interconnectivity to the MCU. So much fun. I had a lot of fun with this film. Oh, one thing I really wanted to mention was how James Gunn did something different. He took Nathan Fillion, of all people, and gave him a cameo where we didn't show any of his body. Nathan Fillion, who, is a very hot man. The past two movies, especially the first, there was a lot of pressure. I think, Chris Pratt was part of that, on Zoe Saldana as well. And Dave Bautista, to maintain these certain physical forms. And there's a lot of pressure on all the MCU actors for that. But honestly, I don't go to the movies for, Chris Hemsworth, sorry, he technically was a Guardian for a little bit. He was an Asgardian of the galaxy. And which we saw, even Thor had to lose weight if he wanted to hang out with the Guardians. It was messed up, man. I mean, you got Rocket and Drax telling people that, telling you that you're getting flabby and stuff. That's in Infinity War. A lot of the wardrobe here is not made to flatter anyone's bodies, okay? It is baggy wardrobes. It doesn't have to be form-fitting. We don't have to show anyone's abs or anyone with their shirt off. They do with Will Poulter, who didn't get the justice he deserved. I think that's unfortunate. We saw that Will Poulter got jacked to play this, this incredible being, but it turns out that he, played yet another man baby in this film, and not as in he's done that before, but as in this film is full of man babies, as is the MCU and franchise in general. He was fun. I like what they did with him, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe he could have been the one to take out the High Evolutionary, because the High Evolutionary kind of killed his mom. I think they did want to do more with Warlock. We had this thing about him kind of like being controlled and being created, but he's still technically a newborn because he was taken out of the thing early, and he doesn't know his own strength, and he's constantly almost killing people or incinerating people. And there's a true of mice and men moment to have with Lenny there. Maybe you have him at the end, he comes to confront the Guardians, but it's actually the High Evolutionary that he's coming to confront. Oh, you blew up my mom. You know how he totally sounded like that? He's the one to take out the High Evolutionary. The creator turning on its master, Frankenstein's monster, finally turning the tables on him. Because I do like how Rocket's whole thing is about moving on. It's not about vengeance. He decides that he's not going to kill the High Evolutionary. Especially when you see the High Evolutionary, he really is just this egotistical, he does so many things that don't make sense in this movie, and his own creations try to take power from him because even they realize it. And he can't handle that because he doesn't want things to be better. He just wants to be respected. He wants to be the leader. He wants to be exalted. He wants to be the only one that really does matter. And everyone else is expendable to him. In this movie, we see that everyone's wearing mostly baggy clothes. There's maybe a couple of moments where, where the characters have to be trim in the official awesome Guardians uniforms. But that's it. Honestly, I think Rocket might have let himself go a little bit, but, he's been doing a lot of heavy lifting with the Guardians ever since Quill got all drunk and depressed over Gamora. So I'm not going to blame him for that. But no, body shit aside, I think that it's great that people just got to be themselves, because once again, I don't go to the movies to look at these people's bodies. I'm going to see what they bring to the characters. And we've grown to love these actors as these characters, not just these characters. There's a reason why the MCU posters start shifting to having everyone with their masks off, because who you're going to see. It's not just that hero, it's that person playing that hero. That's a huge part of the MCU machine, the franchise as well. But yeah, Gunn spits in the face of that in this, or whoever the costume designers were, and everyone. They just kind of let the people be people, and that's fine. And it doesn't mean they can't be heroes. We see Kraglin has, a noticeable pot belly, and doesn't stop him from flying the arrow with his heart. Cosmo got some love. The actual story of Cosmo, I believe the dog's name is Laika. It was very tragic, but I thought that Cosmo was super cute. I thought it was messed up Kraglin was calling her a bad dog, but whatever. Cosmo was a good dog the whole time, Kraglin. Yeah. As always with James Gunn, it comes back to kids. It couldn't have just been the animals. That we see that there's a bunch of kids in cages. There's a child trafficking narrative that's broken up by a monkey impersonation. I just think it's funny how James Gunn really loves making it's all about the kids a theme in his movies. We saw it in The Suicide Squad when we described Weasel's background.
I mean, he's not harmless. He's killed 27 children, but we got him to. I think he's agreed to do this.
When Amanda Waller's people turned against her.
People, John. Little kids.
When Peacemaker couldn't take out Goff's family.
Peacemaker, take him out.
Even the kids?
Yes, all 4 bears now. Peacemaker, goddammit, take.
With all of James Gunn's own problematic tweets. And in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 with the Ravagers.
You betrayed the code!
Ravagers don't deal in kids.
Overall, I thought that this movie was an emotional roller coaster. It was a beautiful send-off to the Guardians and to the actors that have brought them to life for us. You know, we saw a couple of new actors in there as well. The High Evolutionary was played by the actor who played Myrn. It was a funny cameo, at least it was for me, just because of the meta of it all. James Gunn's wife, who plays Harcourt in Peacemaker, she played one of the security people, and and gets shot right through the leg and has this wild, like, realistic reaction to it while everyone else is like stunning people. Gamora's like shooting to kill. It's hilarious. Very dark humor. Gunn loves his dark humor, and honestly, for the most part, I love his dark humor too. But yeah, I really love this send-off. I love that, you know, we progressed from the past, you know, from the, you know, 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the, you know, and we're going into the 2000s next. And Rocket, whose story it was all along, he's taking the rest of the Guardians forward, and it was perfect. Yeah, it was corny. Yeah, it tugs on your heartstrings, but like, to end it with the dog days are over, you know, I think that anyone who is healing and who is doing the self-work and recovering from terrible things, you know what that's like. To, like, you know, we saw Drax standing still, and then he finally breaks loose and dances with everyone, and you know, they don't even sing, they just let out these guttural cries because they finally can be themselves. They finally have their own space, and they're surrounded by everyone who's like them, all the refugees, all of the weirdos, all of the outcasts from the galaxy. They are now part of the Guardians, and they all reside nowhere. Yeah, that cry at the end where they all just scream, it's beautiful. It's great. But yeah, what did you think of the movie? Tell me that I'm reading too much into it. Tell me that I'm not reading into it enough. Tell me some of your favorite parts. So what moments made you cry? What moments made you laugh? I got Guardians 1, I got Guardians 2 coming up. Thanks so much for watching. Like, subscribe if you're into this content. Name's Plant-Based Booch. Stay educated, stay medicated, folks.